All right, no commercial today. Welcome back to the Twinspires Racing Roundtable. I'm Ashley Anderson here with James Scully and Vance Hansen. We have a lot to cover. Maybe that's why there's no commercial. We have to talk the Travers Stakes. We've got Breeders' Cup preps that took place in Del Mar, overseas, and just a lot to cover here. Because over the weekend we saw Fierceness break his win-loss streak, and he won two back-to-back. He won the Jim Dandy before winning the Travers Stakes, just barely over Thorpedo Anna. But then earlier in the week, we also had City of Troy win the Juddmonte in record time. So we'll start with this particular topic. And Vance, I'll start with you today. So after watching the Travers, which a very, very exciting finish there with Thorpedo Anna almost getting the win. But now we have arguably the best 3-year-old in the country, Fierceness, going up against City of Troy, who has never raced on the dirt, but likely pointed to the Breeders' Cup Classic. Who do you like head-to-head in the Classic?
Well, from a value perspective, I'd take City of Troy in that hypothetical prop. He arguably represents Team Coolmore's best shot at a Breeders' Cup Classic win since Giants Causeway narrowly went down to defeat against Tisnow in 2000. Not only does City of Troy have the sufficient class of a Giants Causeway, but like that star of the past, he has plenty of dirt in his pedigree. He is, after all, the son of a Triple Crown winner Justifies. So as far as surface concerns, I mean, we aren't going to know until race day how he really handles the dirt, but he does have the pedigree to handle it quite well. And we'll watch the last few furlongs here of the Juddmonte International. City of Troy actually had a pacemaker entered in this race, the horse broke so sharply, City of Troy did, that Ryan Moore just allowed him to set the pace throughout this 1.25 mile journey. And the field, as you can see, was pretty. It was a pretty large field, but it wasn't especially deep, and so City of Troy was a strong favorite here. And then you can see here Calandigan from the Aga Khan made a very nice move from mid pack and turned in a nice effort himself, but he just wasn't as proficient over 1.25 miles as he was at over 1.5 miles at Royal Ascot. So City of Troy pulled off about a length win here in the International. Now he'll be trained straight up to the Breeders' Cup Classic. Now moving on to Fierceness, one knock against him throughout his career is that he's taken advantage of a lot of favorable scenarios and has had trouble overcoming adversity. Now, while the Travers was surely one of his best performances, especially from a speed rating perspective, he didn't really have much in the way of adversity in this race. The pace was less contested and slower than what might have been expected on paper, and Johnny Velasquez had him very well placed throughout in an ideal stalking position. And he got the jump on Thorpedo Anna, opened up a 2-length lead in mid-stretch, but it did appear in the final yards of that 10th furlong that all the early activity was getting to him, and which suggests to me that 1.25 miles probably isn't his very best distance. He looks more like 1.125 type horse, and of course the Breeders' Cup Classic is going to be coming up a much more difficult race than the Travers. So that is an issue I have going forward with Fierceness going into the Breeders' Cup. I don't have any qualms about that in regards to City of Troy, James.
Well, as far as the 1.25 mile distance, I mean, he definitely got a little bit tired late, and Thorpedo Anna was gaining on Fierceness, but it was also his first race in 4 weeks. I mean, he was also running back on a 4-week rest after winning the Jim Dandy, and let's face it, that's a signature performance at a 1.25 mile distance. He's got that going for him, and a big number as well going into the Breeders' Cup Classic. Whereas City of Troy, to me, you're right about the value aspect of it, but he's still got to work out a favorable trip on the dirt and switch the dirt. And to me, Giants Causeway was better suited for the move to a 1.25 miles on dirt because he had more speed in my mind. He was more of a miler who could get that extra furlong. I look at City of Troy, his best races this year have come at distances longer than 1.25 miles, and he's just not going to get that cush front running trip that he had really in both races or up close trips. I don't believe. I thought that that wasn't a very strong field. He beat otherwise, and that runner up did put a scare into him. So just from the fact that we have more than one international coming for the Breeders' Cup or aiming for the Breeders' Cup Classic, we have got both Forever Young and Dermot Sadagake who are on track to run in the at Del Mar as well as City of Troy. And I would take both those runners over City of Troy right now because of their dirt experience and the fact that I think they're going to relish the 10 furlong distance. So I would go with Fierceness in the head-to-head proposition. I do understand your points. I thought that I didn't understand the ride with per se in the early going. I mean, I understand that Thorpedo Anna's connections might have been anticipating a fast pace, but when they took her back behind a wall of 3 horses, the pace turned very moderate, which I thought allowed Fierceness to have a tactical advantage over in the early stages. And you referenced it. While they were turning for home, Thorpedo Anna was swinging 3 wide as Fierceness accelerated to a clear lead. So I thought he got the best of it, but he still had to dig in and hold her off, and he did so very admirably in my mind. I will say, though, in both his last 2 wins, it's a odd, I think, a little bit of an anomaly. You seldom see horses that have made 8 career starts and have never started from an inside post. Fierceness has run 8 times in his career. He's never started from a post inside of post 6. And in both these last 2 races, which were real impressive in a sense, the Jim Dandy and the Travers, he's got nobody to his outside in the starting gate. So let's see what happens if he's drawn from post 2 or 3 in the Classic. That could be a little bit of a concern potentially. But right now, I would take Fierceness over City of Troy, Ashley.
I have no idea what you all said. I was knocked out of the conversation, but I will just jump in with my analysis. I'm going to say I'm leaning City of Troy, trying dirt as a justified colt. Now, Fierceness, I do believe he proved to us this past weekend that on his best day, he is the top 3-year-old in the country. But you could also argue he just liked Saratoga. I don't know if you all talked about this, but he broke his maiden at Saratoga on debut. Then, of course, won the Jim Dandy and the Travers. So 3 for 3 at the Spa. But what do we see when he goes over to Del Mar? That's my concern. I mean, it took long enough to get back-to-back wins. So 3 straight. Did we really see Fierceness turn a corner? That I'm not sure. I feel confident backing at the Breeders' Cup Classic. And City of Troy, if you go by the class ratings, had a 125 with his win in the Juddmonte. So if I'm going off of those numbers, I do think City of Troy has a little bit more class here, and he's 6 for 7 for his career. So he's shown more consistency than Fierceness. But, in the futures right now, if you look at the odds, the European odds, he is the favorite in the Classic. So what kind of odds do we get at post time? I know, Vance, you were saying before I cut out that you thought you'd get more value with City of Troy, but I don't know. James, what were your thoughts on that?
No, I think in the international markets, that's not going to be the odds we're betting into on Breeders' Cup Day. And I definitely think Fierceness is going to be a much shorter price off of the Travers win. We did not reference the fact that he has 3 wins. It's at Saratoga, and he does love that track. You can make the case. But having traveled to California and run so well in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile at Santa Anita last fall, that would alleviate a little bit of my concerns. I just, I talked about we both talked about the trip he got, which was favorable. He might have to overcome some adversity, but one thing's for certain, he's going the right direction now for Todd Pletcher. He's now been able to string together wins, and he now has a major win at 1.25 miles of the Breeders' Cup Classic distance.
Let's talk about Thorpedo Anna, who was just barely beaten by Fierceness in the Travers. And now going back to face fillies again, potentially at Parks before the Breeders' Cup Distaff. So after this past weekend, we also had the personal ensign where Raging C won. So James, what are your thoughts on the overall picture for the Distaff?
Well, and Thorpedo Anna earned a 107 Bristnet speed rating, finishing ahead second in the Travers, and that number just towers over her potential distaff rivals. I expect her to keep running big numbers this fall. I mean, she won the first four races this year in under cruise control, and she's just going to be faster than any of the East Coast or Midwest or a Dare Manor if she does go distaff. But the fact is, she didn't get the best of trips in the Travers. I mean, she was caught behind horses, had to swing four wide at the top of the stretch, and that was her best career performance. I mean, her best career performance came in a mile and a quarter distance. I think the Horse of the Year title is still going to be on the table for her. I know Kenny Peak said we'll go to the cotillion if she gets beat, but I'm not sure that's a certainty off of the head second. I would look at, I mean, I would maybe run. I don't see why they would have anything to fear if they wanted to prep in the Beldame or Spinster, would give them a little bit more time. And that's going to be interesting to see how all that shakes out because Thorpedo Anna could definitely go to the Breeders' Cup Classic. It might be a 50-50 proposition right now, but at least it's viable. If she doesn't show up in the Distaff field, I think Raging Sea has a legit chance to win. Now, I think her main rival in that race is probably going to be a Dare Manor. But one thing about Raging Sea is that she has just really come on since last fall for Chad Brown. This is her fifth win in the last six starts. Four of those wins are graded stakes victories. She did benefit from the fact that Idiomatic and Randomized went about 2 full seconds faster on the front end than Batten Down was going in the Travers a day later. The Personal Ensign had a legitimate pace. The Travers didn't. But she's going to get some pace probably in the Breeders' Cup Distaff as well. Idiomatic and Randomized are both pointing for the race. There's other speed potentially in there. And like I said, I mean, she's improved. Her speed ratings, her Bristnet speed ratings have really, she's coming off now back-to-back career best numbers for her win in the Shuby and her first grade one victory in the Personal Ensign. And, she doesn't have to be this far back either. Part of the reason why she's this far back is how fast they're going. And I like her progressing form more than I like the form of Idiomatic and others this year that are at least older fillies and dirt fillies and mares. And I'm going to give the edge to Raging Sea if Thorpedo Anna isn't in the Breeders' Cup Distaff, at least right now, Vance.
Despite having some less than ideal trips for much of the season, I'd be looking to fade Idiomatic in her title defense of the Breeders' Cup Distaff this fall. From the start of the season, she hasn't looked nearly as dominant as she was a year ago. And this isn't to say that her likely main rivals, most of whom you've mentioned, don't have their own potential weaknesses. Adair Manor has not been consistently battle tested, racing primarily in Southern California the last couple of years. Randomized doesn't seem as effective unless she gets a comfortable lead. Raging Sea just barely got up to beat Idiomatic there in the Personal Ensign when, as you alluded to, she was the beneficiary of a very favorable pace scenario, which she'd likely need to see again in the Breeders' Cup Distaff. So, in the round, I think Idiomatic perhaps still is slightly the best older filly and mare, but her odds figure to be very short again at Del Mar, and she's obviously proven quite beatable this year. So I'd be looking to fade against her. Going back to Thorpedo Anna, if the Distaff were run today, she would undoubtedly be the favorite off her Travers performance. And, Kenny McPeak right away after the race said, we're going to go to the Cotillion and then to the Breeders' Cup Distaff. It sounded like to me that he was ruling out running against the boys again this year. And, I get that there's a purse discrepancy between the Cotillion and the Spinster Stakes, a race that McPeak won twice back in the day with Take Charge Lady. And there's also that additional gap or additional few weeks between the Cotillion and the Breeders' Cup Distaff that McPeak probably likes. But I think Thorpedo Anna is deserving of a much more challenging spot at Keeneland in the Spinster against an Idiomatic than he would, facing 3-year-old fillies again in the Cotillion. So in that respect, I'm kind of disappointed at the likely race that she's going to make her final prep for the Breeders' Cup in, Ashley.
I don't have much more to add. I would say, Thorpedo Anna in the Distaff certainly think is the horse to beat. Adair Manor, I do feel like did turn a corner in the Apple Blossom and now has a 3-win streak, though only had to face 4 rivals, 2 back in the Santa Margarita. But I do think she's a really strong chance at Del Mar. And then, of course, the closing kick of Raging Sea will be very dangerous here, but I'm leaning it's Adair Manor for me if there's no Thorpedo Anna. If there is Thorpedo Anna, of course, all over Thorpedo Anna in the Distaff. Just seems like the best female in the country right now, regardless of age.
I will say, add one thing that I'd say. Idiomatic. I didn't like her last 2 races. I agree generally with the sentiments of Vance, which are along the lines of, you know, she just looked faster last year. I think she looked a little bit better than she has. She's performed at a higher level as well. But I did think her runner-up effort was a strong performance, and I mean she can't be counted out.
Well, let's talk about the sprint divisions on the dirt in the Breeders' Cup. We had Society earn a berth to the Filly and Mare Sprint this past weekend, and then we saw the Chosen Vron break his 6-win streak by losing just barely in the Pat O'Brien at 7 furlongs, which was actually a win and you're in for the dirt mile. So after the weekend, are you leaning any particular way in the Breeders' Cup Sprint or Filly and Mare Sprint? I'll start with you, Vance.
I'll bring up one horse for each race. I think Mulligan is the now horse for the Breeders' Cup Sprint following his win in Saturday's Forego Stakes at Saratoga. It wasn't a vintage field or renewal of the race, but he won it pretty stylishly by more than 5 lengths. He's now 4 for 4 this year. Another thing I like about him is his cutting back to 6 furlongs. He's ostensibly been a 7 furlong specialist for most of this year. He also won the John Nehrude at Belmont Park the race before this. So he's surely going to have a lot more stamina than some of the other speedier types that the Breeders' Cup Sprint is going to attract. And that race has a long history of favoring horses who showed the ability to stretch their speed over farther distances, especially in the early years of the race when we had winners like Precisionist and Gulch. So I think Mulligan is a horse to really keep an eye on as he cuts back in distance for the Sprint later this fall. For the Filly and Mare Sprint, Vava, I think, was perhaps due for a form correction when she finished 3rd in the Ballerina on Saturday. That was after a kind of a non-dazzling win in the Chicago Stakes over Society, who at the time hadn't had the benefit of a run this season. Society was much sharper on Saturday, winning the Ballerina. Trainer Cherie DeVoe said Vava perhaps is not fond of Saratoga, and perhaps she was right. She's now 0 for 3 over that surface. But at any rate, I think Vava's likely odds in the Filly and Mare Sprint just went up. So I think she'll offer a bit more value now vis-a-vis Sweet Azteca, who kind of took a path of least resistance by staying home over the weekend and running in the $100,000 Rancho Bernardo on Sunday and just dominating an overmatched field, James.
Yeah, I agree with your comments about Milliken. I mean, he's 4 for 4 this season. He's just really come on for Rudolph Brissett. And, well, I thought that Cagliostro, who was the 3-1 second choice, I think he had the tactical ability to potentially keep him within his sights. And, so the complexion of the race changed when he stumbled badly out of the starting gate. And I thought Baby Yoda, who was a front-running winner of the True North 2 starts back, was a candidate to show speed after not showing it last time. But he showed up flat once again. So the race didn't shape up like a lot of people expected, but take nothing away from Milligan. I mean, he was impressive, and he's really gotten good now, and he's going to be among the top contenders in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. As far as Society goes, let me just say, that's the best filly and mare sprinter in the country off of that race in my mind, because this is a filly that in her first 5 stakes wins, if you think she was sitting second or third and winning, you're mistaken. I mean, she had to have everything her own way on the lead and be dominating from start to finish. And she let Money's Gold go and sat patiently in second. And when she went to make her move coming to the end of the far turn, I mean, she just blistered them. It was career best, a real strong, another triple digit speed rating for her. I think she's improved. I really do. I think she's improved from last year to this year based upon that performance, and she's going to keep on running better. And I also will mention Domestic Product because he ran the fastest of 3 races at 7 furlongs on Saturday. He's 1.3 seconds off of the track record, and his improved tractability. I mean, it's just really amazing to me. Since he cut back 2 starts ago, he's been able to show really improved speed. He earned a triple-digit Brisnet E2 and late pace numbers, as well as a career best 103 speed rating. He's just really, Chad Brown back this spring had Domestic Product, who was sort of a long shot for the Kentucky Derby, and Sierra Leone, who was coming off back-to-back wins in the Risen Star and the Bluegrass. And to say that those 3-year-olds have gone in different directions would not be an understatement. Domestic Products, arguably the best 7 furlong or 1-turn mile, one of the better horses in the nation, potentially. Now, there might not be a Breeders' Cup race for him because they might not want to cut back to 6 furlongs for the sprint or stretch him back to 2 turns for the dirt mile. But there's still plenty of time to make a decision on that. It's the same thing with Thorpedo Anna. I'm not putting too much stock in the comments right after the race. These connections will have time to take another look at the landscape and make their final decisions. So, Society and Milligan, they're both serious contenders, and I'm just amazed by how Domestic Product has come on at 1 turn, Ashley.
So I will say it's interesting. Flavian Pratt had the mount on Mulliken. He was on Sweet Azteca, who had the 7-length win the following day, the grade 3 at Del Mar, and then he also had the mount on Domestic Product. So was Flavian Pratt part of the factor here? But also looking at Domestic Product and the Alan Jergens in particular. So, with the Filly and Mare Sprint, that I still feel like is a little bit more wide open to me. But when it comes to the Breeders' Cup Sprint, seeing the Chosen Brawn lose this weekend, I was a little concerned. Was he vulnerable heading into the Breeders' Cup Sprint? He doesn't have elite power to go up against this year or Gunite, but he is still, I would say he's still one of the top, especially being in the California circuit, and now he's going to race at Del Mar for the sprint. But seeing him lose in the Pat O'Brien is obviously concerning. And then in the Alan Jerkins, I was looking at this race as, potential for who we might see go up against the Chosen Brawn in the sprint. And who I had my eye on was Prince of Monaco. Now, he just barely lost to Domestic Product. He got the lead around mid-stretch, and I feel like cutting back to 6 furlongs, I do think he's dangerous in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. I don't know if we'll see Domestic Product, as you mentioned, really cut back. He probably won't do the dirt mile because it's 2 turns and he's better at 1. So I don't know if we'll see him go up against the Chosen Brawn in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, but to me, the winner, the Alan Jerkins, is now who I'm looking at going into that race. So I'm not as high on the Chosen Brawn, and I feel like Prince of Monaco is kind of the horse that I'm looking at in that Breeders' Cup Sprint. But Bob Baffert and Chad Brown both said they aren't sure yet which Breeders' Cup race they're going toward. But I'm going to say Prince of Monaco is probably going to go to the sprint.
That photo showed it right there. I agree with Prince of Monaco comments. I thought he ran a huge race. And, he's a grade 1 winner. Bookham Dano, I thought he ran his race. He's a grade 1 winner, won the Woody Stevens. Domestic Product was just better than them on this day. And those are 3 super talented, 1 middle distance, sprint type 3-year-olds.
Yeah, and I'll say too, you mentioned Cagliostro stumbling out of the gate. That was my horse in the Forego, and had he gotten a better start, maybe we would have seen him close late, but still Mulligan won by more than 5 lengths, so it probably really was his race regardless. But I do factor in the fact that we didn't get Cagliostro at his best. Let's move on to our final topic of the roundtable. So, James, what else caught your eye from the weekend?
I'm going to mention Friday's opener was a maiden special weight 6 furlongs for 2-year-old filly, and Brad Cox had an odds-on favorite who absolutely ran her race, finishing a clear second. But she was no match for Senza Parole. Senza Parole just put on an absolute show. She sat 3rd early, and when she made her move in the stretch, it was quickly over. She wins by 7 3/4 lengths. She ran 6 furlongs in 109 and change and got an outstanding number for a 2-year-old debuter at 98 speed rating. So she's by Gun Runner and Out of a Street Cry mare, which just on paper just makes you think 2 turns. Now, there are some speed in her female family, some notable sprinters, but that Gun Runner is going to definitely potentially provide some stamina. So I feel like, she's going to continue to make noise moving forward for Chad Brown. That was an awesome debut performance. I'll also mention, the Sword Dancer. Basically, it was a 1.5 mile turf race, and you had a horse in there, Far Bridge, who was really, to me, looked like a 9 furlong horse. But what happened in this race was Joel Rosario got on the front end with Far Bridge and basically just walked through 6 furlongs in 117.21 on an uncontested lead and turned the race into a 6 furlong sprint for the wire. So Far Bridge had plenty in reserve after being able to completely walk the dog out there. The thing was, Silver Knot, it was one of 2 runners for Godolphin. And he was a front-running type. And, his stablemate, Measured Time, who was odds on, needed some pace in there. And I just didn't understand. Flavian Pratt, he's on Silver Knot. The fact that he's stalking a couple lengths back a Far Bridge down the backstretch made no sense to me at the time. And I think those tactics on Silver Knot cost Measured Time any chance to win that race. So kudos to Joel Rosario and Far Bridge. That's as a classic theft job as you'll ever see in a big race.
Well, I'll go back to last Wednesday's action at York prior to City of Troy's win in the Juddmonte International. Coolmore and Aidan O'Brien actually swept all 3 group stakes that afternoon. But I'm going to talk about the Acom Stakes for 2-year-olds, which was a Breeders' Cup win in your in prep for the juvenile turf. And the Lion in Winter for Coolmore, after winning this race and is now 2 for 2 in his career, he actually looks a little too good a prospect for Coolmore to actually send to the Breeders' Cup this fall. They don't tend to send their very best 2-year-olds for the Breeders' Cup. And I think this horse has the potential to be very, very good. He is by Sea the Stars. And so far, he's kind of defied expectations in winning both of his starts to date. He debuted at the Curragh on July 20th, and he was actually ridden that day by Wayne Lorden rather than Coolmore's first call rider, Ryan Moore. And the Lion winner kind of jumped up and won at about 5-1 that day. And here in the Acom, he was the second choice to even money favorite from Godolphin. But as you just saw right here, the Lion winner won very handsomely. Ryan Moore was up this time. So obviously not held in the same regard as City of Troy was at this time of a year ago. I still think the Lion in Winter looks a very strong prospect for the early British Classics next season, and I think he is the current favorite now for both the 2000 Guineas and the Epsom Derby, Ashley.
I'll take it over to Canada to close out. So the King's Plate was rescheduled or postponed to Friday, and we didn't get to see a filly win the Travers, but we did see a filly win the King's Plate. Kevin Attard got the job done with Caitlin and Her Greatness, named after Caitlin Clark of the Indiana Fever. And what was cool about this too is Kevin Attard got a win with Moira back in 2022 with Rafael Hernandez, who was also aboard Caitlin Her Greatness. And Moira set a stakes record with that plate win. And now Caitlin Her Greatness came out and beat a very heavy post-time favorite in My Boy Prince, who had been very dominant at Woodbine, but Caitlin Her Greatness, it was her day. She's by Omaha Beach, who also had 2 other stakes winners over the weekend. And then Caitlin Her Greatness is also out of a Giants Causeway mare. She has a win on the turf too. So will we see a Canadian Triple Crown winner, a filly as well? Could be in the cards. We'll see what happens in the next race, but very cool to see the filly get a win on such a high profile day in Canada at Woodbine. So congrats to Kevin Attard and all the connections involved there.
Yeah, even I thought the runner-up got the better of My Boy. The distance got the better of My Boy Prince because he really ran a good race. But, Caitlin Her Greatness still had to go get him and run him down in the final furlong, and she did it. So, kudos to her. It's going to, she can go for the Triple Crown, but Van, she could go for a big Grade 1 race for 3-year-old fillies on the turf in America. So it'll be interesting to see what they opt to do with her.
Yeah, I was just going to mention Hall of Famer Dan Smartley won the Canadian Triple Crown back in 1991. Philly taking on the boys in all three races. Of course, the Queen's Plate, as it was known at the time, was on the dirt, and so she won that on the dirt in the Prince of Wales, but she also was versatile enough to win the mile-and-a-half Breeders' Stakes on the grass. So it's not unprecedented for Philly to win their Triple Crown north of the border, so you never know.
Well, we'll be rooting for her over at Twin Spires. But that's all the time we have today for the Racing Roundtable. We'll be back next Tuesday with more stakes recaps. And of course, on Thursday, it's our Twin Spires jury with our best bets and fades. We'll see you then.
When it comes to horse racing, you can never have too much information. With Twin Spires, you can place your bets with confidence, whether you use handicapping insights like our Brisnet speed ratings, prime power, and past performances, the guidance of our experts' top picks, or just choose a name that catches your eye. Yes! No matter how you pick your horse, bet with Twin Spires. And now you can race to victory with Twin Spires tournaments.